Okay, so now we're going to talk about my favorite runs, which tend to be when the wind is blowing from the shore. It's you know, you're sailing it here, Regatta, and it's the Meltemi. It's you know, in Athens, it's the Levanto, and Palma, it's when the northerly comes in. Miami from the city front. You know, a lot of, you know, those are just for me, just like my favorite conditions. And we know it's going to be puffy. We know it's going to be shifty. You know, in a puff, you're going to be going twice the speed of somebody in a lull, and you might also be in a good shift, so you might be doing more than twice the speed of somebody else. And it's just a totally different game, and I think of it as a completely different game. You know, those steady conditions, I'm very relaxed. I'm thinking ahead about my decisions. I'm thinking, oh, I might be in this lane for a minute. You know, I can really lock in. I might have 90% of my focus on boat speed, whereas in this puffy, shifty offshore, I really don't care about boat speed. I really care about seeing the pressure, and it's all about the ability to see the pressure and to know where to look. It took me a while to figure out that I was kind of looking in the wrong place, and being really free to jibe as much as you need to. You can't even think about how many jibes you might do, because that might constrain your thinking. Your thinking is, I need to stay in pressure, and if the other jibe is better than the one you're on, you just need to jibe. And so kind of my mindset is, you know, head on a swivel, because I'm looking at the wind that I'm in and the wind that I could be in on the other jibe. For me, when I get in this condition, I'm itching to jibe, and there's no point in the run where I'm ever comfortable, because everything is constantly changing. So there's really no relaxing at all. And if you watch where the skipper's eyes should be, his eyes never looked at his own boat. His eyes were completely watching his apparent wind, the apparent wind on the other jibe, checking where the mark was, and maybe every once in a while glancing at his boat. And it's just a totally different focus than on the steady run, where you can actually focus on your own boat speed. And the passing potential is huge in these conditions. You know, you could see the top guys pass 10 boats, no problem. So really, to me, this is where the big moves were made. I had a really big focus on the middle of the course in these conditions, and I'm going to kind of share a little bit why. But you know, this would be like a hypothetical downwind, where maybe you do 5 runs, maybe you do 3, maybe you do 2 if some big shift comes through, or maybe you do 10 if it's really weird. One thing that is worth mentioning, though, is there will be less shifts than the beat, right? So the beat, you're going upwind at considerable speed, and the puffs are coming downwind, and there's going to be a lot of shifts. Downwind, you're playing, there's more like 2 or 3 or 4, you know, shifts that you're going to play. It's more about sort of crossing through the puffs and then trying to jibe at the edge of the puffs, so then you can cross back through it again.
I mean, I think because the gains are so big, and because you're going with the puff rather than through it, when the puff starts to slide behind you or underneath you, you can take that same puff back the other way, which you absolutely cannot do upwind.
Yep. Yeah,
So
it's such a different game. It's such a different game than anything that I had ever done before sailing 49ers, that I almost had to unlearn like everything I'd ever known about sailing downwind, because a lot of these ideas just don't apply to anything you've ever done before. I mean, you're going downwind at almost the same speed as the puffs. So, you know, you can sort of play in a puff. And when you get something, you got to make the most of it, because you might be the only one you get for that downwind, or maybe 1 or 2.
So that comes back to you've got to be super decisive and not like wait and see how this is playing out.
Yeah.
The being patient upwind, you know, is not the mindset for this condition downwind.
Yep. Okay, so I always had this big focus on where the center line of the course was, and there's 2 ways you can say it. One is like a really big focus on where the gate is, or the other is where the center line of the course is. But it was just such a huge factor in my thinking, because anytime I got very far off the center line, I ran out of options, and then I could no longer play puffs. And the other reason I got kind of focused on the center lines was just watching the top guys. And they spent a lot of time in the middle of the course, and they also did not spend time overstanding the gates and jibing 6 times down the middle and passing us every time. And we were trying to do this nice conservative 80% jibe, 20%, kind of like draw it up on the chalkboard. When it's really puffy and shifty, you have to know where the center of the course is, and you have to spend a lot of time near the middle. And that really helped my thinking. And I kind of, in my mind, I always drew like there's this green zone in the middle of the course where you wanted to spend as much time as you could. And you could go into the yellow zones if you had a good reason, but you had to be skeptical. And the red zones started way, way earlier than you thought. And you had to sort of mentally stop thinking of the course as like this diamond of the whole course being open, because the whole course isn't open. There's just this relatively narrow band down the middle, and then some areas that are okay to play in, and then a bunch of areas that you don't want to get in. Common mistakes, for sure, the straight set, jibe set can be just a massive decision. And I've got a case here where, it's a 15-degree shift, and yellow has jibe set and blue has straight set. And you can see progress towards the gate. Blue has made almost no progress towards the gate, and yellow has made tons of progress. So they ran it at the same time, but yellow has made maybe 3 times the distance down the course as blue. And that seems crazy. How could you make 3 times the distance down the course? But, you're in a puff and the right shift, and the gains can be just incredible. So we've got first example, making the wrong call in the set. You can see I like to pick on blue a lot. So blue's always wrong if you're looking for the answer here. Here's a little more of a subtle mistake, which I have made a lot. Blue sees a puff, which is out in what I consider the red area, and they're chasing a puff out to the corner. The problem with that is that puff can never get them to the gate. And if you think, when I get to a puff, I'm going to be hopefully with that puff for like at least half the leg. And so if blue actually gets out to that puff and gets in it, it can't carry them back to the mark. And so it's just this false hope of chasing that puff out there. And yellow, on the other hand, is taking a neutral shift back to the middle, because they're thinking, well, if I'm not sure, I want to be in the middle, so I have options. So, yellow's heading back to the middle, blue's headed to the corner, chasing a puff that's just not going to get them to the mark. And then the mistake that I made all the time was trying to get to the ley line too early. And the ley lines are just moving around like crazy. You get a puff, you might go down 15 degrees, then it might be a 15-degree shift. Okay, now the ley line just moved 30 degrees. How can I call ley lines that are moving around 30 degrees? And the answer is you can't. And if you stay in the middle of the course, the only ley line call you have to make is a nice short one, and that's the only one that you can possibly make in this condition. And you really want to be setting your runs up so that you have a nice, short, but not too short, leg into the gate, and not get into the ley lines too early, because it's almost impossible to call them. All right, so that is, I believe, okay. And then just kind of summarizing downwind, I'm just kind of rotating through my checkpoints, checking my wind, checking the apparent wind on the other jibe, looking for the marks. I know where the center of the course is, and then occasionally checking in with, our own boat speed and heel, but pretty minor compared to the first 3. Part of the reason that I got so focused on where my eyes were just from watching Chris Nicholson sail downwind, and it was like, holy smokes, this guy never looks at his own boat, never looks at the kite, never looks at the angle of heel. He's like looking over his shoulder half the time. He's mostly looking to the inside to say, is what's on the other jibe better than what I have on this jibe? And you can tell that he's asking himself that question like 1,000 times on the downwind. Okay, this is what I have on this jibe. That's what I have on the other jibe. Where's the mark? And all of a sudden that balance swings, and he jibes, and he's totally free to jibe because he's confident in his jibe, and he's not thinking, oh, I don't want to do too many jibes. I don't want to lose speed from jibes. Like, that doesn't even factor in. If he thinks the other jibe is just a tiny bit better, then he'll jibe over and check it out. And if he gets on that jibe, he doesn't like it, well, jibe back, no big deal. You need to have kind of that level of confidence in your jibes.
Yeah, so amen to what you just said. It's the thing I coach most on a puffy, shifty day is skippers keep looking inside the course. You need to know at any given moment, if I jibe now, would I be jibing into pressure? And I think the puffy, shifty days, sometimes, we're so used to sailing on the steady days that when you sail into pressure, an apparent wind goes forward, it feels good. And it's telling you, don't jibe. But on a puffy, shifty day, it can be the opposite. You can sail into a nice puff. The apparent wind goes forward. You start sailing lower. But then if you're glancing inside and see that there's really nice pressure there, then it's what Tim described. Then you're going to experiment with jibing back into the pressure. The best way to get good at puffy, shifty downwind is to get out there on a puffy, shifty day, get ripping downwind in a puff, keep looking inside, and just try jibing more than you think if there's pressure to lure.
Yep. Or even if you're off the center line of the course. Oftentimes that's a reason to jibe. The pressure's even, but you're starting to get off center line, and you may not gain with that jibe, but you'll gain at the bottom because you'll be in a nice spot to either play the last puff or not overstand. And so
yeah, one of the things that plays into that, and I really liked and hadn't quite heard it described this way, your edge puffs don't get you to the mark. That's a really powerful thing to think about. And one of the ways to describe that is we're so used to sailing visually. We look for the wind. We know how important it is to get in more velocity in all of the boats we sail. And so we look for the wind, we get to the wind, and then we figure out what to do. And one of the problems with that is we don't see what we don't see. So if you're leaving the center, you're going towards an edge, you say, oh, there's a puff there, I can sail to it and get to it. But Tim's saying, hey, because that's so far from the middle of the course, if it's moving on the mean wind direction, it's not going to take you to the gate anyway. So you're going to get to it, it's going to start out as header, and you're going to sail for a while, and then it's going to start to fade away, and then you're going to have this dilemma. You're still in the remnants of a header, you're going away from the gate, and there's not that great a wind. And what was sometimes missed in that decision a minute or two before was you can't see a puff in the middle or on the other side because it's not there yet. And this is a really powerful thing, is he started all this saying, these are the kind of conditions where we're talking about this. Well, puffy and shifty is almost always some type of offshore wind or something with really dark clouds around and wind at different layers. And those either geographic or synoptic conditions are almost always mean that there's puffs coming down from above that just hit the course. And so you can't take one look and see where all the puffs are and connect the dots down the run, okay? Because if you look a minute later, there's different puffs, they're in different places, they dissipate, other ones just hit down on the water and appear. And so we all try to be too smart. We overly rely on our visual of what we see at the time. Whereas what he's saying is, hey, if you take neutral either shifts or velocities back towards the middle, assume on a puffy, shifty run, something else will develop. You will get a puff, will come down the middle, and because there's nothing inherently better about one side or the other in the conditions he's talking about. And what he's saying that hit me was, a puff down the middle is way more powerful than a puff out at one edge. From your warm-up lap, you know that they develop out of nowhere. You know that they come. You don't know exactly where, exactly when, exactly what the direction is going to be of it, but you know the puffs are just appearing and disappearing. So it's just sort of an act of faith that if you keep both jibes open to you by not getting committed to a corner, you'll get some puff that you can get on the correct jibe that'll take you not too far away from the gate.